Welcome to our collection of real life stories. Over a number of weeks, participants explore different ways of telling their own story. And then, supported by a buddy, they filmed themselves at home and presented their stories, which is what you're going to be watching in a moment.
Over the years, I've enjoyed gathering a lot of other people's stories, but I'd never actually told my own until this project.
So the opportunity actually to tell my story, I grabbed at that opportunity because I want the previous generations to know that it hasn't always been like this.
My name's David, and I'm a writer, and I write gay-themed thrillers. And I really only started writing after I came out, because I came out rather late in life. I was 51, but I met this guy, and I'd just fallen head over heels in love with him. And I needed to tell everybody, and I needed to tell my mum, who was 86 at the time. And she was surprised to start with, but she was wonderful in the end. She got on with the guy really well, and they became really good friends. And one day we were sat on the settee together, and she said, "Well, now that you're gay, David, I suppose you're going to be joining that London Gay Men's Chorus." And this was something completely out of the blue for me. I hadn't actually heard of the London Gay Men's Chorus at the time. But she said, "Oh, well, you've always loved singing, and you were in the church choir, and you've sung in other choirs and concerts over the years." And she said they were on the One Show on television the other night, singing with Dolly Parton. And they seemed like lovely boys. So that's how I came to join the London Gay Men's Chorus. And it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful to be able to stand up on a stage with all these other gay men and sing to a big audience each time. And there's a story about, I actually told this story on the stage of the Cadogan Hall in London in 2014. And my son was in the audience because I'd been married before. I'd been married to a woman for 18 years, and we'd had a son together. And I was telling this story, and my son told me afterwards that he was sitting there listening to this thinking, "What about me? What about me? You're talking about grandma, but what about me?" And actually, when I told the story on the stage of the Cadogan Hall, I said, well, there was somebody I had to come out to before my mother, and that was my son. At which point, Will just waved up his hand and said, "Yay, yay," and got a round of applause from the audience in the Cadogan Hall. But telling him was the hardest thing of my life. He was 18 at the time, and he'd just gone off to university. And I drove down to see him, and I was terrified. I was really frightened. And I took him out for pizza, and I thought I'd tell him over supper. And we had our pizza, and I chickened out, and I didn't tell him. And then we got back in the car, and we were driving back to the university, and I thought, I've got to tell him now, I've got to tell him now. And I still didn't. And then we got to the university, and I was dropping him off, and I thought, this is the moment. And I said, "Look, I've met somebody, and it's a man." And he kind of looked at me, and he said, "You mean you're gay?" And I still couldn't say anything, and I sort of nodded. And he said, "Well, do you love him?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, that's okay then." And it was just a massive burden off my shoulders. And then he picked up his bag, and he was getting out of the car, and then he just looked at me and he said, "Love you, Dad." And from then on, he's been wonderful support in my life. And coming out after that was so much easier.
This story has a beginning, but no ending. It's the story of my love for Kay. We were both teachers in a secondary school in Essex in 1979. It was wonderful and terrifying for me to fall in love with her. Being lesbian in the 1970s could mean you lost your job, and certainly it could ruin your career as a teacher. This is my story, and I'm sure Kay has her own story to tell. Don't we all? My love for her took me on a new life path. But my loving women began many years earlier. I went to a girls' boarding school in 1964, and I was attracted to older girls there, at a time when the term lesi was a term of abuse. Later, I found out that 2 of our teachers were in a lesbian relationship. I knew at the time they lived together, and I thought how nice that they had such a close friendship. They couldn't be out at the time as school teachers, and one of them became so stressed, she went into a silent order of nuns. Later, when I became a teacher myself, I understood how hard it must have been for them. As a young girl, I assumed, and I suppose hoped, I would grow up to get married to a nice man and have children. In my teens and early 20s, I had relationships with men. I discovered feminism, and I gradually allowed myself to understand that I was attracted to women. Then I met Kay, big time attracted to Kay. I was fascinated by her from the moment she walked into the staff room. Her curly hair, her ability to speak out and get to the nub of a matter, her beautiful voice, her smile, her way of connecting with the students. She came to our school for the same reason I had done. Our head teacher was progressive and child-centred, and it was hard to find a school like that in the 1970s. Not so long since children were caned for the most trivial of misdemeanours. I was in a relationship with a lovely man at this time. I had thoughts of settling down with him and hopefully having children. But I felt something was missing for me. Should I move down to Surrey and live with him? Or should I take up the school's offer to promote me to head of department? What would you have done? And what has this to do with Kay? I sensed I could have a connection with her, and a sexual connection, like a fabulous unfurling, a phoenix rising. I got closer to Kay because I made the painful decision to take up the head of department post. Goodbye, Al and our potential kids. Kay was in my department, so we worked closely together. We organised a history club, taking the children out at weekends. We wrote alternative feminist interpretations for our history curriculum. She invited me back to her flat before a parents' meeting, and I was so excited, especially when I browsed through her bookshelves and saw lesbian novels. I was exhilarated. She made the most delicious soup. I was in love. She invited me to go with her to Mozart's Marriage of Figaro in the half-term holiday. I invited her to supper after the film. At this point, my attraction to her became irresistible. So I made my cunning plan. Seduction scene. I set up a small table in my bedroom. Candle, wine, dinner. What did I cook for her? I can't remember. What did she think about eating in my bedroom? I have no idea. But I do remember I reached out for her as we came to the end of the meal. I leant in to hold her, and we were kissing. I put my hand inside her shirt and held her breast, and she responded, blissful, joyful. She stayed the night in my bed. Over the next months and years, our relationship blossomed.
Hi, I'm going to tell you about a short episode in my life. A long time ago, I just turned 20. I was just out of my teens, and I got my first proper job in London, in Covent Garden, based in a little house in Drury Lane. It was a PR firm, and I had been employed. I was employed by them, and I really enjoyed the job, and it was meaningful because I dropped out of my A-levels 2.5 years earlier, and I'd just been drifting, and so having a bank account, working with interesting people made a difference to me. However, the period before this had been really very traumatic. I was suffering from some really subliminal depression or psychological angst, and even though I was working for this company and enjoying it with people I got on well with superficially, I didn't feel I was myself. I just felt out of place all the time. I wasn't comfortable in my body or my mind, and I didn't know why. I didn't know what was wrong with me. And then one day we were arranging to do the public relations for a theatre impresario. I had done other accounts for a large advertising agency and various other things, but this was more interesting for me because I had a theatrical streak to some extent, and so this person had sent round his representative in the firm, and I was waiting for this person, and then the door was flung open, and there was somebody who looked marvellous. You know, she had a long flowing crushed velvet cloak, kohl round her almond-shaped eyes, deep and brown, pale skin, sort of goth type skin, and a Louise Brooks haircut. And I was kind of really taken aback. I'd never seen anyone like this. It was just intriguing. And we got on, actually, and we were in the same business, and we were the same age. He just turned 20 as well. So we arranged to go out for a date later that week in a wine bar in central London, and we met and we spent the whole evening together, and we drank and we talked and we talked and we talked. We talked about books, about ideas, about music.
Hi there, this is my story about moving to Brighton. I've told this story once before, but yeah, now looking back at it in a slightly different way. I moved here in 2006, so it was quite a while ago now, and I was 21 at the time. I ended up that the reason why I came down here, I was going out with this guy at the time, and I met this woman through work who'd just come back from a gap year, and she was telling me about Brighton, telling me how cool it was. I was a hairdresser at the time, and how LGBT friendly it was, which is great. I was living in the Midlands, and me and this guy decided to come down for the day for Christmas shopping, which was really cool. We met with that woman when we came down, and she was telling me all about it again when we came down, and we just loved the lanes. And I was a bit bored at that time of my life in Birmingham, and decided actually it would be a really good move to move down to Brighton. The relationship that I was in at that moment, it kind of, what I wasn't really feeling it. I can't actually even remember his name, to be honest with you. We're no longer together. And I came down very step by step, and that woman helped me to do that as well. Staying at friends' houses, which was great. Eventually ended up getting down here, and I had 2006. It was a beautiful year. I got a job in a hairdresser's. I, weirdly enough, during the summer, lost that job, unfortunately. They said that it was due to there not being enough clients for me, but I'm not sure if they didn't like me or something.
Picture us in the agony and ecstasy of being lovers in school. It was difficult working together because we were afraid to be outed. And we wanted to be role models for the young women who were exploring their own sexuality. We knew that Bet and Sandra in our A-level class were in love. We found out later that they did know about our relationship, and they found it a comfort. But at the time we had no idea. Because you think that nobody knows about you. And then later, you realise most people did know. My deputy head said sadly to me, "I hope I didn't spoil your chances of marriage by offering you the promotion." And I guess he was also saying that he knew about me and Kay. Kay and I made up our rules for our relationship as we went along. And we used to say we were lucky because we had nothing to conform to. I guess a lot of women did that. The downside was that we had no model for long-term lesbian love. We had very little encouragement or support for us as a couple. I have a vivid memory of us going to visit my parents. My mother had guessed a while ago that we were lovers because of the way we smiled at each other. My parents made a big effort to welcome her, and Kay had terrible period pains, but she rose to the occasion. My mother gave us all huge gin and tonics, and then her real feelings poured out. She told us we were ruining our lives. You're throwing away your potential as women. You are withered leaves. Why would you do that when you're both attractive and you could choose a man and have children? What did I do wrong as a mother? I must have done something really bad to you make such a dreadful choice. And what does your mother think, Kay? Well, Kay's mother has no idea, and she wants to stay that way, not surprisingly giving my mother's angst. I feel so sorry for my mum. She had nobody to talk to about her feelings and her guilt. And where was my father? He came in at some point, and he did his best to be a good host. He talked to Kay about cars, and he offered her a cigar. She smoked the whole cigar, getting paler by the moment. I have no memory of the lunch. But I do remember, when we finally got away, we were holding each other, stunned, wordless.
London at that time was a bit of a hotbed for political ideas and interesting feminist solutions to them. And so we were both on the same wavelength, and both of us wanting to find somewhere to live, because she was living with an old school friend who she didn't get on with, and I was still at home, desperate to get out of home. So we both eventually moved in together. Shortly after, actually, in about 3 months after meeting, we were able to get a flat. It was a flat, a theatre flat, actually. It was in a basement, and it was a great place in a really nice part of London. And it wasn't expensive because it was rented from the daughter of the impresario. So we had this, we were in luck. And I felt for the first time in my life that somebody understood me, that somebody was a real friend, and there was a deep emotional bond between us. We did everything together. We went out, we were wild. We eventually went to university together, to University College London together, though we were in different departments, studying different subjects, but we went up in the same semester, and were there throughout all the years at UCL. And it was an immensely important time in my life. It meant that I didn't have to have a heterosexual relationship, that wasn't the be-all and end-all, and that life was something else. It was something more. There was somebody there for me who cared for me and who understood me in all my moods, in all my emotions and depths. She was there, and I've never forgotten that, and it's remained with me. And I have had other relationships with women of a nearly equal profundity, but it's never quite matched my friendship with Kim.
I was quite upset when they let me go. I went down to the seafront. I never had a towel with me. I wanted to go in the sea, or any swimming trunks or anything. And yeah, I got down to the nudist beach and decided to go for a dip in the sea. I'd never been down to the nudist beach before that. And I went in the sea, and when I came back out, I was sort of drying myself by the sun on the pebbles, and this guy who was sitting there gave me his towel and said, "Oh, you can use my towel if you like." And so I used his towel. We had quite a good chat about the fact that I just lost my job, and I was a bit kind of like, I didn't know what was next kind of thing in my life. And the next day I again went back down to the nudist beach for another swim, but again I didn't take a towel. When I got out, sure enough, that guy was there again, and we ended up having a good chat. It was my 22nd birthday, just round the corner. So I've got a summer birthday, and invited him along to my birthday, and he said he'll come along. We ended up developing a friendship, and then after that we actually ended up having about a 5-year relationship. I'm not a hairdresser anymore, and I'm no longer in that relationship. But yeah, it kind of it was such a bizarre year, really, and quite a funny time. But yeah, we're still good friends, me and that guy, and yeah, that's my story about moving to Brighton.
That means that I definitely won't be a grandmother by you. These were my mother's words when I came out to her in the early 70s. At that time, I was in a relationship with a nice Jewish boy, and I guess it was assumed that that relationship, which I was in for 5 years, would develop into engagement, marriage, and children, and we'd live happily ever after. That's not my story, but this is. I was living in Liverpool as I had just completed a 3-year teacher training course, and it was at and on that course that I met my first lesbian love. In the 70s, lesbians were not perceived in a good light. The information or the messages that I got about lesbians was that we weren't real women. We were ugly. We were masculine. We certainly weren't fit to be mothers. In fact, the choice of being a lesbian sort of correlated with the lack of desire to being a mother. So my mother's words were kind of confirmed that belief of mine that this lifestyle, this orientation that I'd chosen meant no children. This was a difficult time in Liverpool. For me, as a Jew, I had felt in the minority. I wasn't central to society. I faced anti-Semitism growing up. I am the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, and so for me, identifying as a lesbian and I had a yearning and a desire to belong to the lesbian community. And in that way, I felt that I had to conform. And when I say conform, what I mean is what I did was I put on the lesbian uniform, if you like, dungarees, ties, and took on the persona that I thought would help me be accepted into that community. The culture at the time was very much about drinking a lot. I was a smoker as well, and we went clubbing most nights. It wasn't a healthy time and turned out not to be a very happy time either. In terms of legislation, lesbians were losing custody of their children if they came out in a heterosexual relationship. So it wasn't safe, it didn't feel safe to have a child at that time, and certainly it wasn't something that I thought was possible. However, it was the leaving of Liverpool that had a huge impact on my life.
The next part of this story is for you, Kay. The story is written to honour you. Thank you for the joy and exquisite sweetness you brought into my life when we were lovers. Thank you for believing in me and helping me grow into the mostly courageous lesbian woman I became. Thank you for holding my hand when we walked in the park and guys shouted obscenities at us, and when guys tried to smash the windscreen of our car when we were kissing. For holding me close as we stared into the flames of your so beautifully crafted open fire after long stressful days at work. Thank you for sharing your passion for justice. For taking a leap of faith with me so we got our own home together. Thank you for cooking me your fabulous Spanish omelettes and serving them on your Italian China dinner service. I still have one plate. Thank you for the evenings of Ella Fitzgerald with our late-night whiskies. For the weekend jaunts in your crazy car. Thank you for the dances and the kisses, the conversations and the laughter. Please know you have my love, now and always, Kay. Our love has triumphed through the years. Across the world and through the ages, LGBTQ people have continued to find love with each other, despite prejudice, discrimination, and persecution. That is why this story has no ending.
I left Liverpool in the early 80s and I came back to London and had a job in Jewish youth work. At that time, I also met my best friend. Leslie has been now my best friend for over 35 years. Leslie is heterosexual, nice Jewish girl. And Leslie was a great influence on me. I began to reclaim myself, reclaim my femininity, reclaim my style, growing my hair, wearing clothes that were less dowdy, if you like. And it was at that time that I was beginning to realise and consider that actually motherhood, becoming a mother, was something that I yearned, and also something that lesbians, I noticed, were beginning to do. We were becoming mothers. And the other turning point in the 80s was answering an ad in Guardian Soulmates. And what appealed to me about this ad was that the person, Linda, was advertising for someone that would want to create family with her. And she already had a 5-year-old son. She was a counsellor and a teacher, and that was really appealing to me, and she was really appealing to me. And we started a relationship, and it was within that relationship that I began to explore all the possibilities of becoming a mother. She had decided to use an anonymous donor to become pregnant, and that was in the mid-80s. This was now in the early 90s, and there were lots of different ways that lesbians were having children. One very common way was by creating family with gay men. However, I decided that I wanted to have a known donor, and to that end, a colleague of mine who I spoke to about this agreed to be the donor. I was very clear at that time that I didn't want him to have any responsibility, financial or otherwise, and that was the decisions that we both made. I'm delighted to say that my son was born in 1993, to the delight also of my parents, and I had created family with my partner Linda. Our happiness was short-lived because 2 years after my son was born, Linda sadly died of breast cancer, and I was left to care for and bring up the 2 boys. Her son was now 9 years old and my son was 2. It was at this time that I, being a single mom with a very challenging situation ahead of me, I made the decision, maybe not consciously, to bring my children up without the fear that they were going to be targeted or bullied because I was a lesbian. And I guess I went back into the closet at that time. I could easily pass as a single heterosexual woman. I must say that that decision was a sensible one at that time. However, retrospectively, I do have regrets that I didn't have the courage to be out and proud while I was bringing up my children. However, all is not bad, because both my children are very successful, very happy, and the older one, the son of my partner, he is now a very successful businessman, and he works overseas. My son, who is bisexual, is studying for his PhD, and he's actually in his final year. I, together with his partners, have created a queer family, and it's fantastic now to be out and proud, living in Brighton and working in the LGBT community as part of the switchboard team. So my story has a happy ending, and I'm absolutely full of pride and full of joy for the family that I have created and for the journey that I've been on.